Hey, everybody, this is Maha,
And this is Dylan.
and we're the hosts of See, That Wasn't Too Hard, a podcast that discusses everything, continuous improvements all the way down to its basics, philosophy and psychology. Isn't that right, Dylan?
Heck yeah.
So, Dylan, why don't you give us a glimpse of what we're going to talk about today?
Sure. Today is on the organizational health side. And as you probably know from us, we like to make things, break it down to be easy and basic, some big hard topic, and try to make it accessible. And the topic we want to wrestle with today is having diverse teams. How do you, what can you do as a leader to make your diverse teams most effective, or improve their effectiveness? And I want to start with defining diverse. As far as this conversation goes, when we're talking about diverse, we mean diverse thinking.
Okay.
Now, yes.
Having diversity there is quintessential for you to run your business effectively and more efficiently.
Sure.
Well, let's get started.
Same time,
yes.
At the same time, I think a lot of people out there have experiences with failure in leading diverse thinking teams. There's extensive conflict that you may not be able to iron out, and you just wish for harmony. Just get some stuff done. Stop arguing about all this stuff. So that's the challenge we want to break down for you today. All right.
So let's get started.
Maha, we've been talking, and there's really just one principle that we think is going to be helpful here. Can you summarize?
Yep. So when it comes to conflict, a lot of people do see that conflict as a hindrance or as a blockage for operations. The reality of it is that those conflicts come from two different places. One is a conflict in understanding. The processes themselves may not be as clear or as crisp to everyone. And then the other one is more about actually what we talk about, which is challenging truth. And this is what we're going to do first. We're going to start off maybe first with the process, because it's the easiest one, I think, to iron out. And then we're going to talk about hard truth, which might actually be a challenge for some leaders out there, I would say, on how they think.
Maha, you had an example about how to communicate.
So this is actually quite interesting, and it's something that even a lot of my clients up to today have a difficulty with. So I'll give you an example. When there is cross-cultural communication that happens, that is usually where you see a lot of books writing about it. On one hand, I had a client who worked in Japan in SAP. And this is going to be funny to some American clients, but to her, it was very confusing, where they made an acronym in SAP Japan that made a lot of sense to the Japanese, which was product program. And when they acronized it, it was just something that they heard a lot of Googling about. So whenever they said PP at a meeting, people were confused.
Right.
The thing is, she, after 25 years of dealing with that, still did not actually understand why people were laughing every time they made a presentation about it. And this is the thing. You can't just laugh, for example. You need to maybe even have people sit on the side and just explain. Remove the shame of explaining something, because it's not just about the word PP in this case, right? It could be about anything else for that. You need to do it from a humble place as well when you think about it. So you need to humble yourself and just not sound arrogant with the explanation either. So that's another way of doing it from a communication perspective. And at the same time, do it from a place of understanding. This is why this happened. I'm here to support. I'm here to help. I want to actually clarify what I understood, what you understood, and see where the, well, in this case, conflict, or see where the problem was. So this is kind of a really nice approach with communication.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that you started talking about listening and understanding. I think often when people hear be explicit, they kind of resent the effort. And so they start from a grumpy point of view. Like, I can't believe I have to explain how to write an email, or I can't believe I have to explain that sex jokes are inappropriate in the workplace, right? I think that there was an SNL about that, about like, the HR lady drinking the hand sanitizer because it made her, just feel less yucky during having to explain sexual harassment principles to people because they really didn't get it.
Yep.
And that can be really challenging because you can see a lot of problems and baggage and associated with a particular kind of misunderstanding.
Mm-hmm.
But I am unaware of any downside when explaining what your expectations are to being calm and putting your teaching hat on.
Yep. And again,
write letters of frustration and complaint to, let's see here. Yeah, I can't think of a joke, but light me up. You had an example about Slack too.
Oh yeah. So Slack is a really great example too, and I think a lot of people are suffering with it. The interesting thing about Slack is that I think it dissects different people with different expectations, not just from a cultural perspective or from a thinking perspective, but even from an age bracket perspective as well, right? When you think about a lot of people on the Gen Z side and even the millennial side, they're really used to just communicating like that. Some kids have friends that they've never met their whole lives that they just communicated with. So for them, building relationships online through something like a chat, like something like instant chatting, like Slack, for example, is quite efficient, quite effective. And for them, remote working seems quite fluid and easy. On the other hand, when it comes to other individuals, whether on an older spectrum of age or even from different places that just never had that interaction in their lives before, it becomes extremely hard, extremely alienating in some cases, and isolating as well. So a lot of companies that did it well because they've done Slack training, funny enough, where they've made how to use Slack in our company explicit. This is how you can use Slack. This is how you can talk to, for example, people. This is how we're going to actually recreate a digital water cooler chat effect using the app. There's an app called Donut that just sets you up with random people, for example, using Slack, that is just a lot of companies, funny enough, use because you just randomly meet people and you just start talking to them and you build relationships with them. So this is how something like a simple tool that everyone uses or everyone kind of was meant to use thanks to the pandemic actually became more explicit in a company, became more known when it comes to even the rules of engagement, setting up timeframes, for example, of when to send messages, understanding boundaries as well, because boundaries were something that was interesting too. And by making it explicit, well, you got flow, and a lot of companies were able to even go fully remote. And one of those companies, for example, was actually, funny enough, Airbnb.
Sure. What are some common guidelines that you would propose that maybe many users of Slack or managers may not think to talk about?
Yeah. So this, I think, is where a major issue comes in, not from just the Slack perspective, that's just in general, but actually, so part of the training that I even sometimes give is to think in the most abstract sort of sense. You said it at the earlier piece of the episode, is that we really sometimes need to go abstract to understand what sort of belief systems are there and understand what things actually mean to people, right? So you end up having to think about, okay, Slack is instant messaging. How instant doesn't really need to be in my company, or how does it even need instant need to be in my team, because it could be different on a team level. You could think about time. This is something that is instant. I can chat to you anytime. I can send you a happy birthday on at midnight on your birthday, which obviously would be inappropriate, but for some people it's not. Do I need to set any parameters in regards to that? Do I need to set active time? Especially if my employees, for example, work all across the country, or even choose to work remotely somewhere else. So thinking about the abstract, thinking about some of the basics like that is where you really need to start. And when you ask these questions of your employees, and this is where the big thing is, you can't do all the thinking yourself. You gotta think together in a team, right? When you ask your team some of these questions, you're going to discover that they fall on a spectrum of things, right? Some of them are going to think it's okay. Some of them are not going to think it's okay. And then you end up being a fixer. And you end up having to say, you know what? Most of us seem to be okay with this. So if we move here, will this be an acceptable abstract idea for my team, or an acceptable abstract idea for how we want to use this tool? Yes, done. Write it down, make it explicit.
Right. One you did that's a little bit more concrete that I think a lot of people might resonate with is around your idea of time. If you have a chat app and you can send messages to coworkers, what is a polite way or a polite shorthand of when is a response warranted? If you chat someone, do you expect an immediate response?
Are you talking about me?
No, just like people in general. And I don't think this is even generational. Some people get interrupted and they just respond real fast, and in so doing, because they're that way, they find it a little bit disrespectful if you chat them something that's not an emergency.
Yep. And this is
likewise, some people just think of chat as, just a stream of consciousness, and they're just going to chat you, and they have notifications turned off. And they go check on it just like they do their email on a periodic basis. And so they think nothing of chatting up a whole bunch of people and then waiting for the replies to roll in over the next day and a half.
And this is where being explicit is not just a team thing. It's not just a company thing. It also is a person thing. Being explicit on saying, you know what, I do not respond to messages between set time and set time. Some people even said that in email, actually. And by sending it in email, by saying, I received this email at 5 o'clock, for example, I'm currently out of office, I'll respond to it in the morning, is just a really nice and explicit, and actually, in my opinion, I think, a not so rude way of saying it. Obviously, some people think it's rude, but that's another thing. But then it makes it explicit, and it just removes any sort of pre-assumptions or even any sort of assumptions that someone might have about performance or about anything else. So that's another thing as well.
That is a fantastic point. And I have noticed, especially very high performing salespeople and Fortune 500 executives do that.
Yeah.
Like, they are very explicit about just making sure nobody gets the wrong idea of what should be expected.
Yes. Instant. This is the kind of the thing as well. Like, some people as well assume instant messaging just means instant. Really, they do. And when you don't respond to them, when you don't involve them as much, if you don't send an emoji, then it might be offensive, right? So even sending a message over on Slack and saying, I'm going to respond to your question within the next maybe 20 to 30 minutes, 1 to 3 days, if it's not that big of an importance, right? Again, you could look at it whether it's nice or not, but it is explicit. And that explicitness, that pure honesty in this case is a type of not humbleness only, but a type of even vulnerability of saying, this is how I value my time. This is how I value your message. It will be responded to. I'm not going to forget it. It's just not a priority at the moment based on the type of question it is, for example.
Sure. I want to pivot. I think we could talk about Slack and other texting interpersonal paradigms for a while, but one of the things that I think is particularly challenging to across cultures is, how do you read your boss, or how, as a boss, how do you communicate yourself? And people in the Midwest, and in other cultures have, so like Japan, I know, have a non-confrontational style. So if you piss them off, like say I
find out in the mid-year.
I roll into work, at 10 a.m. and I've missed 2 meetings with, some sort of muckety mucks, right? And my boss has been getting lit up all morning. And I say, hey, how you doing? And in a Midwestern world,
yes,
like there's a decent chance that my boss is not going to say, I have a problem this morning. I have been getting lit up for 2 hours because you missed 2 meetings. Do you understand the impact that has made on me? In a calm and clearly that was impactful to this hypothetical boss and in a negative way.
Yeah, probably.
but there's a decent chance that in the Midwest that instead of having that conversation, they're going to instead do something petty.
Yes.
Right? Or like make you do a lot of menial work and just, the image of Putin asking for his pen back, all the way after he got to the end of the table, just kind of not being confrontational, but trying to get back at that person.
Yeah, this small things sometimes that piss you off, right? But this is a great point as well, because it's not just, again, we're moving into diversity a little bit from a cultural perspective, but you can even think about it as actually a diversity from even a thinking perspective, because it's not just people in the Midwest who could not be confrontational. Sometimes non-confrontation is a way people deal with after experiencing some sort of trauma or experiencing some sort of anything else. So it really depends on it. So again, if I want to actually take a step back, I will say this is not just a diversity from a cultural perspective anymore. We're talking about diversity in people and how they interact with the world.
Right.
Non-confrontational bosses could say, okay, I'm just going to deal with the problem and move on, right? And then just not bring it up to the employee. It's a way of protecting the employee. We talked about it previously. On the other hand, as well, they might just not be non-confrontational. This has ruined my morning. It's going to ruin the rest of my morning. Might as well get back to my employee. Yes, get back at my employee. Thank you. Oh my God, my brain. Might as well get back at my employee for this. And I'm not going to give him any new clients. I'm not going to give him any new projects that he might ruin. Interesting fact. When you do operational work like that, as a knowledge worker, you want to solve problems as quickly as possible, i.e., this has made an error. I shall prevent that error from happening by preventing the whole situation from happening, which is what our kind of mind steps into when we seek these problems. What that manager should have done instead is say, you know what, I need this employee to do more work. Instead of preventing them from doing work forever or for a while, let me just go sit down with them, have a conversation, and ensure that they understand what happened give them the autonomy as well in this case to say, look,
Mhm.
this is what happened. This is what what came to my plate. This is maybe how I advise you should deal with it.
Sure. I think
And
a lot of people's baggage, especially people who I've worked with and mentored, who are non-confrontational, see the situation as they can't not know. They like they know what they did. It was a deliberate stick in my eye, right? And it becomes personal, right?
Mhm.
And so in that being hurt about getting stuck in the eye, it's especially hard to speak in a measured tone to someone you are very sure is malicious or out to get you or something like that. And that may sometimes be like there are jerks in the world, and sometimes they stab you in the back and
Yeah.
do wrong things to you. Sure.
So I'm
But
actually, yeah.
there's no downside to being explicit, even with those people, about how they hurt you.
So there's a website that I like that I think every SME or every small to medium size company know, which is Mind Tools. They do post a lot of previously really expensive corporate tools that are really useful. One that I could recommend in this case as well to look at would be the Ladder of Inference. Have you heard of that before?
Nope.
So this is something that I've learned really early on. It was one of the first things that I've learned when I actually joined Shell back in 2010, and I still brag about it today. Not brag about it, but use it today, basically. I just tell everyone is what I mean. And it actually tells you that once you hear yourself make a statement like that, he knew about this. You start kind of going back down the letter and you're like, wait, what data do I have to prove that he knows about this? Was he CC'd in the email? Wait, no. He seems to be okay coming in today. So does he not care? Wait, maybe he just doesn't know about it. And at the same time, you kind of challenge your conclusions in this case, because they are conclusions, and you just look at the assumptions and just say, well, is it really going to hurt me if I just talk to them and see whether they know about this or whether they understand what they've done? When you see your kid, even when you talk to a child, right? You're not going to say that the child has broken the vase intentionally. Sometimes, yes, you're like, yeah, this child is about it. But anyways, please never think of your children like that.
They do that a lot. What you talking about?
Yeah. So they do that a lot, but that doesn't mean that they're just self-destructive kittens that are just going to destroy things. They don't do that, but it's usually just a side because of something else. So you're going to say, did my kid really just break the vase or the vase because they wanted to? Obviously not. Were you playing something that you were not supposed to? And then you just sit down with the kid, and the kid will end up saying, well, I was playing baseball in the house because I couldn't go out, or something like that.
I was seeing how hard I had to swing the hammer before the vase broke.
Well, that's the self-destructive kitten. But
a lot of people have baggage around being explicit. It's scary, it's confrontational sometimes, and it makes real something maybe that you've half stated in your head. And
yes,
that last can be a scary place because it can be vulnerable. Yes. If you say, this is my idea, and then Larry from engineering says, well, that's a stupid idea. Because engineering has no filter, right?
Yes, I miss working on them.
Right. And so you might start to protect your ideas by never saying them directly. But recognize that if you're really after true improvement, you're not going to get there by letting the idea or the expectation be unsaid.
Yeah.
Because if the idea really is stupid, that's okay. And you can improve the idea. Larry's brusqueness notwithstanding.
Pretty much, actually. I mean, we all need a Larry in an organization. I would actually even say sometimes, but well, not really, because it might hurt people's feelings and stuff. But at the same time, we all need that sort of explicitness to be, well, okay, so you know what? We all need psychological safety. Psychological safety doesn't mean safety from criticism, doesn't mean safety from being hurt, actually. This is something that I think a lot of people confuse with psychological safety. Psychological safety actually means that you're able to share something and someone is able to challenge it back. If there is no challenge back, there is no psychological safety, and you can kiss your dreams of continuous improvements really goodbye in this case. So
because
yeah,
you don't have buy-in. You don't have, like you just said something into the ether. If you are talking to a leader and they are trying like mad to avoid being explicit, recognize that they might have fear of what might happen should they be explicit, and see if you can reduce that fear. And
let me add something then, Dylan, too.
Yeah.
You're not going to reduce that fear unless you understand where that fear comes from. It might be a legacy of pain, just like we've discussed in a previous episode. So a boss maybe before you, or someone around you might be causing this sort of fear, so that might be the source of the fear. On the other hand, as well, you might be the actual monster in this case. Maybe not for reasons that you know or are aware of or can control. Then becoming aware of it, understanding it, talking through it might actually help. Because if you got upset at someone and fired someone for a mistake that they've done, that sets precedence, and that sets up assumption that a lot of people are going to have about actions and consequences.
Right.
So think abstract always.
Yeah. So listeners, I would challenge you to be explicit where you can. Describe things more than you think you should. These are not necessarily our ideas. We believe in these, but the long-standing best practices, if you go talk to marketing teams, they will look incredulously because people don't hear what you think they heard, like most of the time. And marketers are very familiar with that idea. Salespeople are very familiar with that idea. That's why they spend 10 minutes of first 10 minutes of every sales call meticulously going over the goals and the intent of this sales meeting.
And they're good. Yes.
Yeah, and it might drive you nuts, but they like, this is old stuff. And spend the time to get people on this, going in the same direction.
Yep. So sounds like we already have tools to offer, right? Be explicit at the beginning of the meeting. Talk about what the goals are. Talk about what the intent is. Talk about what the possible looking outcomes would be. Be explicit on what type of decision you're actually giving. Are you giving a decision that is final in this case? Or are you actually giving a decision that, or an idea that can be challenged in this case as well, which will give your employees the allowance to understand whether an idea needs to be challenged, could be challenged, or something that is already set in stone and just needs to be executed. So that's even one way. Be explicit on how you use certain tools, even if you think that the baseline is there. Make sure you make it explicit. I know that a lot of people think documentation is a waste of time, but documentation is really a short discomfort for long-term success. Good companies do good documentation for a reason, right? And if you don't want to write, documentation could be a video. There are so many different ways you could document things, right? At the same time, know that taking a pause in the middle of a meeting to just really look at that ladder of inference and make sure that your assumptions are actually in check is, again, a short pain that's going to bring you more long-term success. Thinking Fast and Slow discusses that in a lot of books by Daniel Kahneman, and I think a lot of really great business psychologists and even behavioral economists talk about. So short-term pain for long-term success is part of continuous improvement. Awareness and explicitness was really a deep-rooted idea, I think, in continuous improvement as well. Being able to understand that humans are fundamentally flawed and are not a system that you could just continuously keep testing as well as another thing too, because we haven't discussed how what could be explicit one day may not be in the next day. But that's for another episode, I think, as well, and how to handle that. Dylan, I'm just going to ride on my wave of consciousness and say thank you so much for today's episode. Really enjoyed talking about it with you and really enjoyed talking about how explicitness in organizations is just such a fundamental way to really improve organizational health. Dear listeners, we would love to hear from you as always. We appreciate the challenges that we hear from anyone. We're also looking, by the way, for people to interview. So if you're really interested in being interviewed for our podcast, just let us know. Don't forget to click like, subscribe wherever you hear this podcast on. And until then, see Dylan. That wasn't too hard.
That wasn't too hard.
Thank you so much. Stream of consciousness achieved.